Hi, guys. Welcome to another episode of Omni Athlete. You're here because, like us, you believe that sport is a vehicle for elevating global consciousness. But you know that elevating consciousness through sport only matters if it actually helps you to compete at your highest level. We created this show to empower your performance with the wisdom and techniques of the world's highest achieving mind, body, and spirit competitors. Okay, so today's guest is a doctor of physical therapy, former college football player, entrepreneur, and martial artist. He's brought his innovative, energy, and kinetic chain-based approach to enhancing performance through natural movement to athletes at all levels, including the highest of the professional ranks. It's my pleasure to introduce to Omni Athlete, Dr. John Kummrow. Welcome to the show, John.
Well, thank you very much. I hope I can live up to that intro.
So it's always interesting having a guest on for a second time because especially if it's somebody that I know, because the conversation just seems to constantly build. And a moment ago, we were just talking about the charge of the body, essentially. And what sparked it was fascia. So I kind of want to start at this place of we have negative and we have positive in the body. As athletes, how do we leverage that dynamic? And maybe the specific question is, what are the different ways to affect the positive or the negative?
Well, those are very large questions because when we're talking about positive and negative, I mean, that can be anything from chemical to emotional to mechanical modalities, and by modalities meaning different techniques, whether it's delivering of an NSAID to light massage to dealing with positive or negative thoughts. You know, that's been a big thing. You know, you've seen Kevin Love and a lot of people speak out about the anxiety, depression, and everything else that comes with the pressure of being an athlete. And sometimes, you know, maybe even if the person wasn't that way before, then they get something like CTE. You know, you look at so many people that are having to deal with that now, trying to figure out which realm you're working with at the time. You know, do I need, a pill for anti-inflammatory? Do I need to not take anti-inflammatories? You know, do I need to do something that's going to loosen my body or tighten my body? It's that very dualistic concept of, am I needing this physically, you know, chemically or emotionally? And usually, of course, it's a little bit of everything, and sometimes weighted more in, I need to get more protein in. So there's my cellular engineering way of affecting that concept. I have, too much sodium, so I need to, take things that, scavenge, sodium up, which would be, different other chemical mediators. And so you're trying to figure out, look at my CBC counts, how am I going to play with my chemical engineering that way? And when I say CBC, I mean it in a functional way now. So,
what is CBC?
Comprehensive blood testing.
Okay.
But a lot of times with physical medicine doctors now, they're looking at functional test results because normal CBCs are looking at a disease range.
Okay.
But when you're talking about an athlete, somebody's like, okay, I'm not being ruled in or out for a disease, but the way that I'm playing or doing things, I'm a little bit deficient over here, or I'm a little bit high over here. And so a lot of times, doctors can look at those things and now say, okay, we're not looking at this from the lens of a disease, but we're looking at it from the lens of how are you functioning with, what you're doing activity-wise.
So one of this triangle of chemical, mechanical, and emotional, that's something that I hear you reference quite a bit. Where did you cultivate that? Not so much like learning it, but where did that show up for you as an athlete? Did you start saying, when I feel this in my body, that tells me I'm feeling something mechanical and I need to work there, or I need to adjust something chemically? Have you kind of been able to have that attunement, so to speak, with your body?
Well, it's the same thing, just going back into most of us athletes saying, I need to get more protein in, but then you can get too much in, or I need to hydrate, but then I feel bloated. So, how am I finding this, plane of performance that's really like that optimal, okay, I'm not, a little bit too waterlogged because I felt like I overcorrected when I was dehydrated. I'm, eating so much, sugar or this or that is making me feel like I'm not performing. So of course there was that looking at, protein shakes to meals to timing of meals to, all of those sorts of things for that part. And then of course it's, okay, where am I in the gym? Like what physically am I not lifting well at, whether it be legs, shoulders, arms, hands, wrists, which part of me needs, more attention right now, what's doing pretty good. And then, I think those are ways to kind of evaluate and assess those things. And then of course, looking at the emotional self is that idea of, reflection or being present, or of course then projecting as well, so that's to each person to look at too. I'm having some sort of resistance from different traumas in the past, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional.
Can you reflect on a time where that emotional component came up for you really specifically around performance?
Yeah, probably when I had that spinal cord injury, it was looking at, the day that I was out there playing and people that are around, it was on my birthday. They're like, you don't need to go play today. And I was like, sure I do. I'm a starter. I have to,
right.
And they're like, no, you really don't. And so then, fourth quarter when the injury happens and when I'm going through trying to figure out why can't I move, it's like V equals IR, right? So that's just like Ohm's law. So then it's like, okay, what's creating resistance? I know I've got this resistance right now, but what led up to that? What part of my ego said you had to play, and whether, you're going to walk across the street and get hit by a bus, you never know. But, still looking at, yes, I did make this choice regardless of why at this fork, or other things that were going on in my life at that time to say like, where was I being too superficial? Where was I not thinking deep enough, and trying to figure out all the reasons why, you're there at that time. And so, just the identity of saying I'm a football player, where after a while you're like, I'm not a football player anymore, and that's a really hard thing, I think, for a lot of athletes when I ask them, what are you if you're not that?
Yeah. What do they say?
It just depends.
Yeah.
Everybody has different responses, but a lot of times, you don't think of it that way because you think of this will never end, and really it always ends. And so that's a hard thing of course you say that on one side, but you don't want to tell young kids, like, yeah, believe you can get there. But at the same time, as you go through life or as you see ability levels, if they say like less than 1% of NCAA D1 athletes go pro, then regardless of how good you are, your chances are still going to be low. Just make sure that you've got some backup for identity besides athletics.
So there's this duality, right? Of like, okay, I have to push myself and I have to know that I'm going to make it to that point. And yet I also have to know that at some point, even if I make it as far as I can see, it's going to stop at some point. What drove you as an athlete to embrace knowing that you were going to be there? Like, where did that come from for you?
Beware.
Well, let's just take the college level, right? So as a young athlete coming up through middle school, high school, like what drove you to get to that level?
It really wasn't that good. So I would probably say that it was more that challenge of trying to get better and seeing if really I had met where I could go, or if I could, raise to the competition, trying to raise to the competition. As whether it's, how much I could run or how much I could, process the game. It's not just physical talent, right? You do have to be, somewhat intelligent in these ways to be able to understand where to be, especially the great ones as their, physical strength starts to wane. They always make up for it with the mind, right? The wily old vet.
Yeah.
So, it was trying to have progression and direction.
More so than a specific goal that said, I want to be a D1 player. I want to be a All-American. I want to be whatever the case is. Were you driven more by that feeling of I want to grow and get better than a specific outcome-based thing?
Like I said, since I didn't feel like really that I was going to ever be that good or something, then sometimes when I would get, good or play up to that level, it was just like, okay, well, is this really sustainable considering other things? And it was more that direction of progression than saying, oh, I'm going to be a pro athlete or I'm going to be All-American. Those weren't things that I would think about.
Interesting. So now as you fast forward, you have your injury. What was it that you did to shift your identity? Can you reflect on because you were forced to face that question, right? What am I without football? What was the answer at first, and how did you shift it over time?
Well, I mean, because I was always prepping the whole time, it was difficult, but it wasn't as difficult, I think, if I would have put more into the athletics part. Like there was still, of course, dreaming there, and that and I just had knee surgery too. I mean, I didn't really, play much in college. And so, because there was always the next thing. And that's, I think, what happens to so many athletes once they start to have an issue here and an issue there, and it's really hard to really return to that form of feeling whole. And even when you do, then it seems like sometimes you just get brought another event, and then eventually you start to say, okay, why is this happening again? And you've got to go through that same reflection process that we were just talking about.
So one of the notes that I made from our previous conversation was the difference between transformer and avatar, right? And how we progress in what our body is to us. So could you walk listeners through what you see that difference to be? Like when you say transformer, what do you mean? And when you say avatar body, what do you mean?
I was just having this conversation with, so many of the people when you come in, I'm watching with my 9-month-old, we're already parting him out. Where are your eyes? Where are your ears? Where's your nose? The difference between a transformer and an avatar is basically skin, right? Because transformers move like a human body, but the difference is there are a bunch of mechanical parts that have become a human sort of personality. Yeah. But we all start as the very old mechanic of here's this wheel and I'm screwing in this nut, and we're all these, parts of a car. Yeah. And then we start to realize like, okay, we're not so metal and mechanical, we're more squishy, if you will. Maybe not squishy is not a good word, but pliable. Yeah. And how these, and that goes back into our, the conversation we were having before the show started about fascia, and that, so then we get into that transformers place, and then we get into the avatar place once we put the skin on, which is like your biggest organ. We can make robots and stuff that are starting to move very much like what we see on TV, but one of the hardest things for science or anything is working with really severe burn victims and things like that. When you see combat vets and people who have been in tragic, fires, whether it's oil rigs to houses, and, to make skin look like it's not aging almost, if you will, wrinkles and scars. And we have not figured out that regeneration process yet. Although one of my patients' wife was doing things with pig bladders with combat vets and showing how the stem cells in that really improve healing as compared to conventional wound healing techniques. So, these ideas of stem cells and what we're going to be able to do with them definitely is the foundation of where all that's going for nerve and skin regeneration, as opposed to it being, more like a transformer, being like a Tesla that has a computer program that makes all the car parts work like a human. It's actually a human.
So if skin is the difference, then what, as an athlete, how do I leverage that? So what is the difference in my movement?
Well, if that's your biggest organ, again, it's basically, if you think of the Incredibles, you're talking about keeping on your super suit. That's what I was saying about not parting yourself out. I'm not a knee injury right now. I'm not a hip injury, because then you put too much subconscious intent into one place, and that kind of gives you an Achilles heel, because, that's the place where you didn't get your... Yeah, well, talk to DeMarcus Cousins. That's no offense, Boogie. But, whoever it is like that, you're going to have a part. And as soon as you over focus on the part, then that's what I was saying about being able to get back to being whole when you're playing. And that's kind of more like an idea about our homunculus. We're always being taught about our shoulders or this or that or all these different parts.
Right.
So there's just really so many parts to be able to work on so that you are wiring yourself in the most efficient way.
So this idea of wholeness, when if we just map it to a patient, when somebody comes in and is dealing with a specific injury of some sort, are there cues that you pick up on that says, this is somebody who has already parted themselves out, and that might be part of the problem?
Well, everybody parts themselves out. So, you got to go into it with that idea.
Yeah.
And so then after that, it's going back to that simple V equals IR. You want your biologic computer functioning at homeostasis. Then if you're looking at V equals IR, then you're trying to make sure that there's not a resistance impeding current.
And resistance can be more than just physical.
Well, again, it just goes back to the triangle. It can be any one of those three things can cause scientifically based resistance in the system.
So let's talk about images. And what we talked about in our previous conversation, or what came up, was that we use images quite a bit. And one of the things that I think makes your style of movement and how you approach movement so unique is that you're really bypassing, it seems like, a lot of what we consciously want to interpret when we say, okay, move my arm like this, move my leg like this. And instead you're leveraging language to create pictures, right? To create images. At least that's what I interpret. So how would you describe the use of those different words, phrases, languages, and how that accesses maybe a different part of the body?
Well, anytime we're taking in verbal, visual, or any sort of external stimulus, we're getting a stimulation of parts of your body and brain, right? So really, the concept that you're talking about is neurolinguistics. You're using your words to try to get somebody to either open or close a door and create a pathway, right? So that's really what any sort of coaching is. That can even go into ways of just simply how we're talking to each other in so many ways. Even politically, unfortunately, to bring that up. But anything like that, then you're starting to create connections. And so so going back to what you were asking about imaging, it's the research of, okay, I have a basketball player, I have him envision shooting 20 shots and see how he does on the other side. And I think that the research said like 13 out of 20. Then you have somebody actually practice 20 and then retest again. Okay. And then they got like 14. So basically, that's, I think, a big concept that we talked about maybe the first time in Jordan's book about visualization. So then we know that imagery increases strength. So trying to use imaging and coaching to really get more connections working is what neurolinguistics is. And that's really, anytime we're using imaging, we're creating strength and we're changing the way somebody's trying to sequence the way they're moving.
Do you find that you almost end up experimenting with patients or even with yourself on what is the phrase, the word, the image?
Oh, sure. And it can change daily. That's very, very Myers-Briggs, right? Think about doing this. That's your motor cortex in the front of your brain, right? So it's a command center, your higher executive cognitive function. And then you have your parietal lobe. That's all sensory. Feel this, but depending on the person or which part you're trying to affect, we have motor nerves, fine, command them. We have sensory nerves, okay, feel them. Then we have nerves that are both. And then it's like, well, what do they need today? Do they need to command it or do they need to feel it? And you try to play with both and then use it as a somewhat of an algorithm to see how they're responding. Or sometimes, of course, then people just need to not have feedback. And that's, if any criticism of mine, it's like, just let them process it instead of trying to help them, or correct them. Just let them find it out. And it's hard when they need to sometimes learn their lessons instead of being able to be taught the lesson. So
how do you balance that as a coach, right? When you're working with somebody,
everybody gets frustrated, then just let everybody go and do it on their own and take hey, well, you're going to do it, but I'm not going to be here trying to correct you or whatever, mess it up 100 times if that's what it takes, but mess it up to get it right instead of trying to be perfect at it first.
What's fascinating as I reflect as a teacher, so I can conjure up quite a few examples of teaching and reflecting on, wow, that was about me when I was teaching them, right? That individual, whether it was a specific technique I was working them through, something they were training for a test, tournament, performance, whatever the case was, when I was coaching them, I can see now I wasn't coaching them. I was saying, this is a projection of what I'm dealing with, and you need to show up in this way. And I would imagine, had I just pulled back a little bit and said, okay, here it is, work on it, take your time, work on it, we'll be here. There's a different kind of space that gets held for the person, whether it's a client, an athlete, whoever. Have you found techniques to help you kind of hold that space for somebody without just saying, here it is, and then leaving? Because there's a space in between, right? We have a chance to support an athlete who's in front of us, and we're saying, okay, this is your next step. I see it. I'm your coach. I'm not going to push you. I'm not going to keep prodding you, but I'm also not going to disappear. What's that in between?
Well, again, I think it's going back into what's your message, who's your audience, and of course, all of us as teachers are also learning, and so most, not all of the time, I'll say it's not the learner, it's the teacher, so we should be able to try to help them. And even if it's basic stuff like, where you at today? You want me there with you the whole time? You want me there every now and then? You want to come get me? You want to just try this on your own, and then I'll test you at the end, giving options, but then at the same time, if you're going to also be responsible, then saying like, okay, I've given you options. You've tried to do this way. It is or is not working, or as fast as it needs to, or stuff. So now I have to try to get you here. And then once you do that, then you try to say, there's things that I think could be done without athletes. Like, what is your learning style? We have to do that in grad school. KLOB, K-O-L-B. Are you a simulator, diverger, converger, or accommodator, I think is the 4. And so then you can see, is somebody a trial and error learner? Do they need to observe first? Do they need to analyze? And then if you've got a certain amount of learning style for you understanding your audience, and you can try to pick the environment to put them in to succeed.
There's a responsibility that goes with coaching that I don't want to say we take for granted, but it's easy to lose awareness of what we're ultimately responsible for, which is the person in front of us, right? I mean, I'm processing this a little bit out loud, so I'm curious to see where this takes you. But so we have a responsibility to ourselves to show up in the best way we possibly can. But in the role of a coach, our job is to say, how do we get the best possible development, growth, performance out of this human being in front of us? And it seems as though that's an easy thing to lose sight of.
I think though, it's an easy thing to lose sight of. If you always understand that you're responsible for others, then you try to do your best, but sometimes doing your best is doing your worst. Sometimes you get the best out of them when, you would think it's the worst thing. Other times it's, hey, you've got so much structure that you need to go play. Just, hey, it's raining out there. Instead of going and running and whatever, you guys have to all go wrestle in the mud, and trying to figure out, do I really want to over process? And sometimes you just got to get people back to play. So again, it just goes back to, if you're saying as a coach that I got to do that, sometimes when you're having a bad day, if everybody else knows that too, and they're having bad days, that's better than trying to put on the mask of the good day. And then really you're resisting where you're at. And
there's a vulnerability there, right?
Oh, sure. Well, there's also a chance for growth when you face fears, right?
What has your relationship been with fear? Like when you think of moments in your life when you've been the most scared, how has your relationship to experiencing that changed?
Well, I mean, it's recognizing that, it's always going to be there in certain times. And as much as you try to, desensitize, which you can and will do, and get to that place of, well, whatever happens, happens. At the same time, there's also that place of mortality where, when you're really, faced with that choice, do you really want to be like, okay, I'll do this to the death? Or once you see death, are you really like, I was just kidding, like I kind of want to stay longer. Yeah. So, I mean, understanding how to go into, like we've talked about before, places where you can't have fear and doubt when you're performing, because it creates, too much of a chance for there being just that little bit of effort change when you're hitting somebody that makes you be able to absorb as opposed to get injured. I'm worried about this. So you change the way you're moving. And so then again, that predispositions for either performance issues or injuries.
So
fear and doubt. I mean, we have FABQs, fear avoidance behavior questionnaires, because we know when somebody's afraid of falling, they're going to increase their fall risk. So, then it's very simply, transferable to how that works for, people are worried about their, person who's in the hospital. Sometimes it'll make certain people play better for them. Other times it'll make people not be able to, perform the way that they should. And so is one right or wrong? There's, that's like a Romney thing of not having a, right or wrong. And so it's just hey, I learned that when I was going through this, I'm not the one who performs better. I need to take myself out as opposed to thinking I'm going to be the hero for that person. Or, you look at Jordan, it took him 2 years in baseball to get over his dad, not get over, that's not the right, to be able to cope with his father's death before he could get back into basketball, which is really who he was. I mean, he was an okay baseball player, he's such an athlete. He can almost do whatever he wants, but 2 years with the White Sox and minors and stuff before he could, really get back to what he, was made for on the court. So, I mean, but Jordan, and that's like his only example really of not being able to deal with that because, you look at the way that he played when he had the flu. I think it was against the Cavs or the Trailblazers or something.
Game's iconic.
Oh yeah. Well, I saw those shoes were like up for sale in the auction for like $187,000 was what like the guy bought them for. But there's such a great, thing of regardless of, I doubt that I can play with the flu or I fear I'm not going to, and what he did, that time. But that was a chemical thing. Now his dad, his loss, which is physical and emotional, created this huge, different chemical fear and doubt response. I think it's, nucleus. Oh, it's your locus ceruleus in the brain. That is your fear and doubt place, which is funny because it's Latin for blue spot.
Interesting.
But that's not very oceany place to be. So, but really really what the Latins meant is like your fear and your doubt makes you blue, I think, is maybe what they were inferring at that point or something like that. But basically now where I want to show everybody what I can do even while I'm sick is different than when I'm emotionally sick from my father's loss. And what that did, because that's so much different from a flu than the person who brought you in and raised you and, had all of this, that's such a different way of addressing fear and doubt based on, again, these different examples of back to that triangle.
And it is interesting to consider that the fear and doubt created in that moment for him was so drastically different than, or at least how he could perform was so drastically different than the physiological impact of something like the flu, right? Which is draining physically, right? It doesn't lessen. And in fact, maybe on the surface, we interpret sickness to impede performance more per se than an emotional response to something traumatic in life. But we're seeing now more and more, like research is showing us that's just as detrimental to the body. It's interesting to see that played out in real life at the highest possible level.
Yeah, well, I always think about too when he put his head down on the trophy. So I don't remember the actual timeline of it as far as like if his dad died that last year, because I remember him playing through that. And then he took his break or however that went. But I still think that the example is valid as to the difference in how it changed what somebody chose, their behaviors and things like that, between the contrast of the flu versus the death.
And what it brings up for me is this really interesting idea it's come up a couple times recently in talking with guests. And it's this idea of, why are we playing? And one of the biggest evolutions I've gone through as an athlete is having to figure out like what drives me to actually play. And this is why I started the question.
How about it's because all of our parents don't want to deal with us when we're little, so they want you to go and do something else. You need to go play something and not us anymore.
So let's riff off that, though,
like,
right?
hey, you're like soccer, woo.
And what happens, right? Okay, so you see that happen, and then you have somebody, you as a kid, maybe you're good, right? You grab it and go, oh my gosh, this feels good.
Right.
But what we've seen happen now is somebody goes through life and these layers keep getting stacked that started as just get out of the house as a parent because I just need time to be able to think. And these layers started getting built that now that's my identity as a soccer player. Now I'm playing because everybody tells me I'm good and I don't want to not be told I'm good. You get into this really interesting identity loop, and then you hit this crescendo point sometimes where all of a sudden it's as if the ball just drops and suddenly the game has no meaning to you. And we've seen this. And so I'm curious, where does that take you?
Well, I mean, again, I think, if we're not, you can, if you want to say a blank slate when you're a baby, which, I think is not really a appropriate interpretation, but, we know that memory, is very short-term young. And so then once you are kind of this white wall that starts to get stimulus, whether it's academically or athletically, oh, you're smart. It's not different than athletics. Then you're competing as a debate team. You're still an athlete, but you're a brain athlete, and so it doesn't matter what it is. Like you said, you start getting the stimulus and am I this or am I not this? And then if that's where you're making your dopamine, oh, like that feels good. Somebody tells me I'm good, or I just like to do this, whether it's competing or not. Now, every human goes after what dopamine stimulus is going to create their pattern and their personal identity. And so as you go through all that forms you as to if you're going to be an athlete, or if you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to play sports, but I know I'm never going to be like some of these other people, and is that really the case? Or do you just not feel like working to the way that they work athletically because you would rather do it academically, or any sort of, pot of stew of those combinations?
And do you have the awareness at the time to be able to recognize that, right? Maybe,
but at the other times too, then something happens later, and so the timeline and the experiences, and then who's around you, I mean, how are you thinking about all these things as they happen, your successes and failures, and then we're back to that dualism thing again, and then how you're processing those successes and failures. So many kids could be so great, then they have this one loss, and and they're little. That's and it's very similar. You can find parallels to then at the highest level. It's like how is your support group or lack thereof helping you decide or not decide, process what your decisions are as, do I continue to play? Do I want to put how much of my time and energy here, or do I want to put it, or have I thought about other places? Some people, they never have people tell them like, hey, there's other stuff to do. Do you really want to do it this way? Or,
What does the word process mean to you? It energizes me the way you use that, and it brings up a specific feeling for me. But I'm curious to you, when you use that, what are you telling yourself about how you're experiencing?
Well, I mean, I think if we're basically just a biologic computer, we're always processing, whether we're aware of it or we're not. And so do I need to create awareness? Do I need to leave awareness alone and just be present instead of trying to project or to reflect? So it's somewhat of an awareness and somewhat of an enlightenment, and another part of it is just living.
Touch me about creating awareness. Do you mean bringing awareness to something that's happening?
Well, sometimes it's also bringing awareness to things that could happen, and so, again, it could be that whole past, present, and future. Do you look back? Do you look forward? Or, certain people can just be right in the moment and not look back, not really gaze forward, and not look side to side or up or down. They're just right there. And then there's other people that are constantly spinning up, down, all around, trying to see everything. And then again, combination of those two dualistic alternatives.
When you've seen that from somebody, either as an athlete that you've worked with, or just somebody as a patient in your clinic, how does that manifest in the body? If we're somebody who, and this is maybe overly simple, but it's like if we're somebody who's constantly past future, or for somebody who's kind of more anchored in the present, do you notice when somebody walks into your clinic, hey, I can feel where their energy is more consistently?
Well, that sometimes too, like you said, as a coach, depends on you. You know, sometimes I don't have the same eyes that I did at a certain time, even though you try to treat the last patient like the first patient, you've still had an awful lot of interference and things like that from everybody else that you've been with and worked with that, you can't always be seeing where they're at. Sometimes, people have to take the initiative to tell you where they're at.
So you're somebody who sees, how many patients do you see in a given day?
Oh, anywhere between, let's call it 14 and 18.
So over the course of a week, right, you're easily interacting with 100-ish people, give or take. Sometimes probably more, sometimes less.
If they're different people, sometimes, if you see people twice, and that's when a lot of these questions could have a lot bigger tails. Oh, I saw this person on Tuesday. They were like this after the weekend, now weekend routine's usually different than week routine, not always. And then, oh, this happened during the week and now here's where they're at Tuesday, and then it's very variable sometimes, than what people will be like. And then there's other people that regardless of what happened here, they're pretty consistent every time they come in. And then those ones, of course, are much easier than if something changes in their body language or their, word choices or things like that. You're like, where'd that come from? You're pretty much like this. So any shift makes me think what happened, as opposed to when people are all over the place, then it's a different, prerogative.
So sometimes your cues for what somebody might need in that moment don't come from their body at all.
Well, it can come from their mouth. It can come from their movements. It can, just come from, body language and language.
So that's incredible. And the piece that seems really energizing to me is to reflect on, how do we build the kind of awareness that as a coach, if somebody is in front of us, we're picking up not just on, hey, did they run the route that I told them to, or that this play calls for, or did they execute the block the way that I said, or the lift that the way that they know they're supposed to, but what are their words saying to me, right? What are their eyes saying to me? What are their there's a plane of communication. And we talked about this a little bit before, but I can hear so viscerally how much that informs, and I felt it, how much that informs the way that you are then able to interpret what that person might need in the moment, what their body might be telling them, or maybe what they don't know that they need.
Well, and again, sometimes too, it's just due, like, again, we can over process all of these things. And so, you do your best to, again, try to help everybody perform. And then it goes back to things that we said in the conversation about how the teacher or the learner can either take initiative, give up initiative, or to not take initiative, and then start to see how things progress from there and then make adjustments.
Was there a difference in relationship for you between coaches that you had as an athlete and instructors you had in the martial arts? And if so, what were those differences?
I think that, as any mentor, sensei, any coach, or anybody who's really responsible for their interaction with another person is going to have a style. Certain people are going to yell at you, and it's not really yelling at you. That's their way of loving you. But, you don't understand that, maybe at the time, depending on how you've been yelled at home or things like that. Or sometimes, the people who understand that then are better athletes, because it's like they've got like a dad or a mom or somebody who yells at them at home. So then they get the coach that does it, and they're like, why are you guys all so sensitive? Yeah. And then there's other people, who don't do that. So I think every coach is going to have a style, on a certain level. And then of course you get, coaches who try to have a lot of styles. And so of course everybody's going to default to a certain style. But like, for example, my style and I definitely do not want to create a link between me and Bill Belichick, but, Bill Belichick's big thing is like, he's not predictable, right? Everybody else has a certain amount of pattern, and he's always able to change or modify his style so that people, they know what to expect, but they don't know what to expect. And that's really what you're trying to do, because if people know what to expect, then they're going to know how to prep, right?
Yeah.
So it's always, for as much as all what we're talking about putting this into science and a system, then it's also about that organized chaos component of being unpredictable. I did not see that coming.
And there's a tension that exists there. If you're a coach and you can leverage that, there's a tension that exists between you and your team, right? That may produce a just positive level of focus, of heightened awareness, of ability to remember that you do have to be on your toes constantly, because it may not be the same as it was yesterday.
Well, and it also creates creativity then,
Yeah.
you know, and an opportunity for shift. Yeah. If something has taken form and it is just that form, then it's always staying constant. And of course, you've got to, you know, embrace the change too.
What does it look like when something takes form? Okay, so what came screaming through my head right there, and if you guys can't see me, my brain just lit up. What does it look like when somebody's body takes form in a new way?
Well, I mean, you can see anything from, you know, a lot of people with certain skin issues, you know, they start doing cardio and actually pumping blood out there and their skin changes. They don't have this little eczema, you know, or things like that. Or, of course, something simple as, oh, look at their pecs or their ab lines. You know, and so then you see lines through leveraging change, you know, whether that, you know, be, you know, lines. And again, that doesn't mean movement, right? I change my nutrition, my lines change. So that goes back into my movement can create that leverage line change. So can my chemical, or let's go into then the emotional part, since the EE part. And really this is for all my engineers too. We got mechanical, chemical, and electrical, right? Since I was EE before I was pre-med. And so then it's like, okay, the EE part being, we know that more with women than with men, even though this really is with men too, when you have a lot of stress, your kidneys release cortisol and it makes them retain more abdominal fat. So therefore, if I stress manage, I also change my leverage lines. So now here's your example for each one of the points of the pyramid.
Leverage lines. What do you mean by that?
Well, your body's constantly moving. It's having to leverage against gravity. So the way that you are, oh, I'm slumped over, I'm emotionally beaten down, or maybe I have scoliosis. Again, emotion versus mechanical, or I'm, you know, upright and feeling like I am, you know, taking on the world. Then, you know, when I slump over, I'm going to look fatter. Right. When I stand up, I'm going to look thinner. Yeah. And so therefore I've leveraged gravity differently. And then again, go to one of those pyramid points.
This is so cool. So I was just reading a study, and this is teeing off gravity, right? So leveraging gravity. And we've had guests before who've quite literally said, hey, I use gravity, right? Gravity isn't an enemy to me. Gravity is a friend. Gravity is something that I leverage in performance.
We always do, right?
Go.
Well, I mean, if you're, I mean, to me, that's a very like sky is blue. Of course, you're leveraging gravity unless you're crawling on the ground. And even then you're still leveraging gravity. So that's I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just, to me, that's a very blanket statement point of like, I leverage gravity. Of course you do. How? You know, and then, you know, what ways do you leverage gravity?
So there's a study that they did, and I don't think this is new. I just recently crossed my my path. There was a study done with a Qigong master, or maybe it was a Tai Chi master in China, who was able to affect the decay of this radioactive substance. Its half-life. He could slow or speed up its rate of decay just using his Qi. And what I did not know was that the weak nuclear force that he was essentially acting on is 10 trillion times stronger than gravity, which blows my mind first and foremost, and then makes me wonder, okay, so what does our energy, can we affect gravity, or is our energy interplaying with gravity in a way that we don't necessarily see or experience because we're just not tuned into it?
Okay, so this is a great example, and again, I'm sorry for interrupting you about the gravity comment, but so the thing about what we're talking about again is that as a planet Earth, we have this gravity constant. Yeah. People are very not constant in overall, right? And so when you're talking about Qi in somebody, it's a much different ionic electromagnetic way of creating force, right? And so one of my favorite patients, he's a physicist. So anytime you say anti-gravity to a physicist, they're going to,
Get very excited
no, they're going to basically tell you that you're crazy because the only time that there's anti-gravity is the inflection point of a plane going up to right when it's about to go back down, that instant of everything going up. But we haven't been able to create an anti-gravity environment on the earth besides that point. Right. But as human systems, it's different. So what he and I would try to talk about is I said, look, I said, you're human. You have 3 balance systems, your eyes, your ears, and your ankles. And so I said, why can't people invert? Yeah. And that's very much based on ear and how, if you've got 180 degrees when you're standing on your feet of your world, front, back, then you have to be on your hands. Then you understand your full 360. And so then it's like, well, your ear is constantly orienting you against gravity. It's an anti-gravity system. Okay, because it's pulling us down, right? So then it's like, okay, so then, if we flipped upside down, then it's we're not getting pulled up, we're getting pulled down in the ear. And so then it changes completely how you're going to use your movement patterns. We know that there's the difference between open and closed chain movement patterns. So the arms usually open. Yeah. So now you close them on the ground and let's see how you do, and a lot of combat vets or maybe amputees or stuff, they will absolutely murder people as far as movement patterns on their hands and arms because they've had to learn that that's how they're going to leverage gravity in order to be able to create transportation for themselves to the next place they want to go instead of being just stagnant and in one place. And so we had a little experiment because the ankle balance system is your somatosensory system. So that's coming out of your ankle when it's on a 90-degree reference plane. And so we got a stick and I put him into a pike position. And he said, well, you have to push down on the ground harder to go into a handstand. And I said, yes, I know that, but you cannot think you're pushing down harder because that's not the way your system works. So now you're wiring yourself wrong between your very, very smart, frontal lobe and what your body feels. Yeah. So I said, okay, here's this stick right here and here's hands and here's feet. And I said, okay, now you do it your way. And you push into your hands to try to handstand. Yeah. So he goes like that and he pushes down here and the stick goes down and the stick goes down. So we do that 10 times. Okay. So now I want you to think you're pulling up through your hands so that the weight is lifting you and helping you up, not you pushing into the weight to try to get you up. Yeah. So then instead of him collapsing down this way, he started to go this way. And so that goes back into what we were saying at the beginning about that think feel idea and how we're affecting certain parts of our body that are creating then movement pattern differences.
So for any athletes listening right now, there is a fascinating emergence, and maybe it's not even emergence because it's not new, but it's growing, right? Just quantum research in general into quantum mechanics is erupting right now, and there's really fascinating things happening. Even if you're an athlete who doesn't necessarily say, okay, I want to dive deep into that world, what, John, it sounds like you just pointed out is there is such a strong correlation that we can experience in real time between the difference of what we think and what our body is going to do with that thought that we're firing.
Well, I mean, I'm going to address the quantum part because quantum energetics and everything is an absolute fantastic, fascinating frontier. Yeah. And it's the same idea as stem cell. We have this cell that can differentiate. So now we're talking about, again, trying to control the organized chaos part of math and of medicine, right? So that's really when we're looking at algorithms that adapt, now you really start getting into AI. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, yes, we know that that's where everything is going. And so, but at this time, trying to see where the frontier is, yeah. We're going to blow off flares here and there that are not going to go anywhere. Right. But then there's also going to be places where you're going to have these huge connections. Yeah. So, being able to understand when is this a great idea in theory and when is this actually applicable, that's still where, quantum energetics and things like that have their place. How much is placebo? How much is actual science? But one of the things I really appreciated at my time at Regis University when they said, if there's really something there, we should be able to extrapolate it at some point. And so, but the hard part again is having algorithms that are adaptive. And that's really what so many, engineers are doing and working on, whether it's in that place of computers or in science and in stem cells. They're really playing with the same thing, and that's creating a system to chaos. And that's a really, hard place, because it's kind of like, oh, you got a flu shot. Well, yeah, there's 20 or 70 flu viruses that we isolated that thing and we know what that thing is. But then the virus says, but I'm biologic and I can adapt to what you just did. So now I change my RNA, and next, what do you got for me? And then you try to kill most of them, and you get to that one cell that says, but I just know how to adapt to that. And you get another change. So that's why no matter what we do for a system, it's constantly having to adapt to that chaos component of, hey, I just shifted my genetic sequence on you. Now what are you going to do? And that's, of course, when we get into why people have genetic markers. Are you going to express, or are you going to not express? And when to do what about that?
So, oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack right there.
There's a ton. You start going into genomes and quantum energetics and stuff. But that's why, again, we have so many people that are way, way smarter than we are working on this stuff. And there's definitely something there, but it's getting to that place of one of my other patients that I always brag on is, she looks at cancer, right? And so she's got this cancer and she can fix it at that instant, 99.9% of the time. But we're talking again on this parted out cellular level. But you're this huge billions of cells biologic. So she says, okay, John, if I'm 99.9% right that time, after 1,000 trials, I only have a 64% accuracy rate. And what happens when I'm in the millions and stuff, I'm pretty much not there. Now I'm the 1%. So then she engineered a bacteria to do it. And the bacteria is wrong 1 in a million times. But that's still not that good when we're talking about scale. Billions and scale. So we're getting there, and we've got these steps of like, hey, there's something there, but we're just not there yet. So we've got to play in these realms, but there's going to be more waste than reward at first.
Yeah. Well, as comes with the territory of pioneering
of anything. Yeah. So it's normal, but being a informed, critical consumer of anything, I think, is important.
Yeah. Wow. So and with all of that, as an athlete, just that little experiment with gravity, right? That little experiment with the handstand, what that speaks to in me is, okay, even if I don't spend a ton of time researching quantum physics, even if I don't spend a ton of time researching the spiritual connection between mind and matter, even if I don't want to dive into those worlds, I can simply recognize that there is actually something different that happens to what my performance looks like when I shift from saying I'm going to push down on the earth as hard as I can to I'm going to lift my feet up. I'm going to lift up through my hands.
Right.
That changes my performance. You don't have to dive any deeper than that, other than just saying, hey, look, what I think changes how my body moves.
Right. And that goes back to that neurolinguistics. And so that's exactly right. So yeah, internal articulation is expressed through, these different avenues of speech or body language or movement.
Oh my gosh. This has been incredible. And the energy is rising, which is ironic because we're right at the end here. So before I ask my final question, John, where can these guys go to connect with you online?
I believe I've got an integrative physiotherapy Facebook and Instagram. I believe I have everybody else work on the social media. Not really my cup of tea.
Is that right, John? Okay. So the final question, we asked you this last time, so I'm actually going to ask you a different question because you answered the question of what does it mean to be an omni athlete. I'm going to ask you, what is your mission in life around movement and sport?
Education, information, and options. Like you said, as a coach or as a provider, it's trying to get people to understand who or what they are, whether it be like, what is your matter? My teacher would say, what is there? You know, is it my skin? Is it my ligament? Is it my, nerve? Is it my muscle? You know, getting people educated as to having a diagnosis. As to so many people come in and they've been to, various providers, and I say, "What's your diagnosis?" And they say, "I don't know." Or they say, "Well, they took my history, but they didn't really do a really comprehensive exam process." And it's like, well, we need to really make sure we know, as best as we can, exactly what's wrong with you. Every now and then, of course, there's not an answer to that, and that's when we have to delve into more abstract realms. But when we have science, let's use as best we can first, and then we can start going into, alternative realms and starting to work with those things.
Gosh, it's a good mission. We need more just understanding, right, to what it is to be an athlete, what it is to be a human being.
Clear, concise, comprehensive.
I like that. John, thank you for being on the show. Oh my gosh, guys. Dive deep into John's world and everything that he is doing. Social media, go follow him, go reach out. One of the most amazing things about the work that he does is it empowers not just physical movement, but an entire different philosophy of life. And it sounds extreme, but it's true, right? When we change how we move our body and how we engage with that movement, we change how we think and we change how we feel. And if we change how we think and how we feel, we change our reality very literally. So go connect with him, dive deep into the work he's doing. If you're in Fort Collins, stop by and say hi. And until next time, thank you guys for watching this episode
Thank
of
you,
Omni
Josh.
Athlete. Hey, what is up, guys? Thank you for watching another episode of Omni Athlete. Please go like and subscribe to our podcast. That is our goal right now, is just to build this community as big as we possibly can, and we need your help to do it. So like and subscribe, share our content, guys. If this content adds any value to your world, if it helps you perform, connect, go deeper, go wider, whatever it is that it does for you, if it provides value, all we ask is that you share our content and help grow this community. We can't accomplish our goal of elevating global consciousness through sport without you. You are an integral part of this mission and this purpose, and we need your help. So please go like, subscribe, and share our content, and continue to help us build and grow this community that is truly motivated to not just elevate consciousness, but elevate and shift the very culture of sport so that we can truly experience the athletic experience in a brand new and energizing way for so many people, guys. So thank you, and please like and subscribe. Until next time.